It was a bright and sunny morning in the heart of a quiet suburban neighborhood. Retired General Samuel Carter, a decorated U.S. Army veteran, sat in his wheelchair near the local park. Samuel was well known in the community. At 68 years old, his presence commanded respect, not just for his military career, but for his kind nature and the wisdom he often shared with anyone who stopped to chat. Today, however, he was simply enjoying the warm breeze and the sound of children playing in the distance. Nearby, Officer Daniels, a young police officer in his early 30s, was patrolling the area. Known for his no-nonsense approach, Daniels had a reputation for being quick to act, sometimes too quick. On this day, Daniels noticed a group of teenagers spray painting a wall near the park. As he approached, the teenagers spotted him and scattered, leaving behind their cans and unfinished graffiti. Daniels picked up his radio, reporting the vandalism, but his eyes caught Samuel sitting nearby. Daniels, assuming Samuel might know something, walked briskly toward him. His steps were heavy, and his hand rested on his baton. "Hey, you," Daniels called out, his tone sharp. Samuel turned his wheelchair slightly to face the officer, his calm demeanor unshaken. "Yes, officer. How can I help you?" Samuel replied politely. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Did you see who was spray painting that wall?" Samuel gestured toward the graffiti. "I saw a few kids, but they ran off before I could get a good look." Daniel's frustration boiled over. "So you just sat here and watched them? You didn't think to call it in or stop them?" Samuel frowned but remained composed. "Officer, I'm in a wheelchair. I'm not exactly in a position to chase after anyone." Daniel's tone grew accusatory. "Convenient excuse. Maybe you're covering for them. You people always stick together." Samuel's expression turned stern. "Excuse me, young man. I've served this country longer than you've been alive. Don't you dare speak to me like that." Daniels, already worked up, misinterpreted Samuel's firm words as defiance. He stepped closer, his grip tightening on his baton. "Are you resisting me now?" Samuel raised his hands, palms open. "I'm not resisting anything. I'm simply stating the facts." But Daniels wasn't listening. In a moment of misguided authority, he reached for Samuel's arm. Samuel instinctively pulled back, his wheelchair jerking slightly. Daniels took this as resistance and, without thinking, struck Samuel's hand lightly with the baton. The scene escalated quickly. Nearby bystanders gasped in shock. A young woman pulled out her phone and began recording. "Hey, what are you doing?" "He's an old man," she shouted. Samuel winced in pain but refused to let the situation escalate further. "Officer, this is unnecessary. I've done nothing wrong." The crowd grew, murmurs of outrage spreading as more people realized what was happening. Daniels seemed to notice the phones pointed at him and hesitated, but the damage was already done. Samuel, though hurt, maintained his dignity, staring at Daniels with an expression of disappointment rather than anger. Within minutes, another officer arrived on the scene, alerted by the commotion. This officer, a more senior and measured man, quickly assessed the situation. "Daniels, step back," he ordered firmly. Daniels reluctantly obeyed. His face flushed with embarrassment as he realized how out of line he had been. The senior officer knelt beside Samuel. "Sir, are you all right? I'm so sorry this happened." Samuel nodded but said nothing, his pride more bruised than his hand. The young woman who had been recording stepped forward. "I have everything on video," she said. "This is unacceptable." The officer nodded grimly. "Please send it to us. This will need to be reviewed." As the crowd began to disperse, Samuel was left sitting quietly in his wheelchair, surrounded by concerned neighbors. Little did anyone know, the incident would spark a firestorm that would extend far beyond their small community. Miles away, Samuel's son, Marcus Carter, would soon see the video and learn what had happened. And when he did, the world would hear their story. Later that evening, the video of the incident began to spread online. The young woman who had recorded it posted it on social media with the caption, Retired U.S. Army General Samuel Carter, treated like this in broad daylight. Unacceptable. Within hours, the post had thousands of likes, shares, and comments. People from all over expressed their outrage at how an elderly man who had served his country could be treated so disrespectfully. In the video, Samuel's calm voice could be heard, even in the face of aggression. His dignity stood in stark contrast to the officer's actions. "This is wrong," one comment read. "How can anyone treat a hero like this?" Another commenter wrote, "He deserves respect, not brutality. Justice for General Carter." The video caught the attention of local news stations, and soon it was being played on television. Journalists began asking questions about Officer Daniels and the department's handling of the incident. The police department released a short statement, saying the matter was under investigation, but that wasn't enough to calm the growing anger. Miles away in New York City, Marcus Carter was sitting in his office when a colleague showed him the video. "Marcus, isn't this your father?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Marcus froze as he watched the screen. Seeing his father flinch from the baton struck a nerve deep within him. His father was his hero, a man who had dedicated his life to serving and protecting others. To see him disrespected in this way was unbearable. Without hesitation, Marcus picked up his phone and called his father. "Dad, I just saw the video. Are you okay?" Samuel's voice was calm but tired. "I'm fine, son. It's not the first time I've faced injustice, and it likely won't be the last." "But it shouldn't happen, Dad," Marcus said, his voice firm. "You don't deserve this. No one does." Samuel sighed. "You're right, but what can we do? It's done." Marcus's jaw tightened. "It's not done. I'm coming down there. We're going to fight this." The next morning, Marcus boarded a flight to his father's town. As a well-respected civil rights attorney, Marcus had taken on many cases involving police misconduct, but this one felt personal. He wasn't just seeking justice for a client. He was fighting for his own family. By the time Marcus arrived, the video had already gained national attention. News vans were parked outside Samuel's modest home, and reporters were eager for a statement. Marcus stepped out of the car, his presence commanding respect. He faced the cameras and spoke with determination. "My father is a retired U.S. Army general who dedicated his life to protecting this country," Marcus said. "What happened to him is a disgrace. We will not rest until justice is served." Inside the house, Samuel watched his son from the window. He was proud of Marcus, but also worried. "You don't have to fight all my battles for me, son," Samuel said when Marcus came inside. "This isn't just your battle, Dad," Marcus replied. "This is about respect, dignity, and holding people accountable. If we don't stand up now, who will?" That evening, Marcus and Samuel sat together, discussing the next steps. Marcus planned to file a formal complaint and push for an independent investigation. "We need to show them that actions have consequences," Marcus said. "Not just for you, but for everyone who's been mistreated." Meanwhile, the community rallied around Samuel. Neighbors left flowers and notes of support on his porch. Veterans from all branches of the military reached out, offering to join the fight. "You've got an army behind you, General," one veteran said during a visit. "We won't let this slide." The momentum was building. What had started as a single act of disrespect was quickly becoming a movement. Marcus knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to see it through. For his father, for their family, and for the countless others who had faced injustice, he vowed to fight with everything he had. The video of the incident had gone viral within hours. Millions of people shared the clip, condemning the officer's actions and demanding justice for General Samuel Carter, a retired U.S. Army general who had served his country with distinction for over 30 years. The footage showed the officer using unnecessary force on a man in a wheelchair, and the internet was ablaze with outrage. Samuel's son, Marcus Carter, watched the video in disbelief from his office in New York City. Marcus was a well-known civil rights attorney who had taken on high-profile cases across the country. He was used to fighting for justice, but seeing his own father treated this way filled him with a sense of rage he had never felt before. Marcus immediately picked up his phone and called his father. "Dad, are you okay?" he asked, his voice shaking with concern. "I'm fine, son," Samuel replied, though his voice was heavy with exhaustion. "It's not the first time I've faced something like this, but it hurts more now. I thought things would be different after all these years." Marcus knew his father was a man of immense strength and dignity, but this time was different. This wasn't just about Samuel. It was about a system that had failed someone who had given everything to protect his country. Marcus promised himself he wouldn't let this go unanswered. The next morning, Marcus was on a plane to his father's city. By the time he landed, news outlets were already camped outside Samuel's home, looking for a statement. Marcus stepped out of the car and faced the cameras head-on. "My father is a hero," he said firmly. "He dedicated his life to serving this country, and this is how he's treated. This is unacceptable. We will not rest until justice is served." Inside the house, Samuel was sitting quietly, his military medals displayed on the mantel behind him. He looked up as Marcus entered. "You didn't have to come all this way, son," he said, a faint smile on his face. "Yes, I did," Marcus replied, sitting beside him. "Dad, this isn't just about you. It's about every veteran, every person who has been treated unfairly. We're going to fight this." The first step was filing an official complaint with the police department. Marcus, with his legal expertise, knew exactly how to navigate the system. He demanded an independent investigation into the officers' actions and pushed for transparency at every level. The officer involved, identified as Officer Daniels, was placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. As the news spread, veterans organizations and civil rights groups rallied behind Samuel. A peaceful protest was organized in front of the police department, with signs that read, "Justice for General Carter," and "Respect our heroes." Veterans from all branches of the military stood together, demanding accountability. Meanwhile, Marcus began building a legal case. He gathered witness statements, reviewed body camera footage, and uncovered Officer Daniels' troubling history of complaints. It became clear that this was not an isolated incident. Daniels had a pattern of using excessive force, particularly against people of color. Samuel watched the growing movement with mixed emotions. He was deeply touched by the support, but also saddened that such actions were still necessary. "I didn't fight all those battles overseas just to come home and fight another one here," he said to Marcus one evening. Marcus placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "Dad, this fight is different. It's not just for you. It's for everyone who believes in justice and equality. We're going to make sure your story leads to real change." As the days went by, the movement continued to gain momentum. Samuel's story had captured the nation's attention, and the call for justice grew louder with each passing day. The Carter family was determined to turn their pain into progress, knowing that the road ahead would be long but worth every step. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Marcus wasted no time. He filed an official complaint against Officer Daniels with the police department and demanded a full investigation. Alongside this, he began to prepare a civil lawsuit, determined to hold the department accountable not just for his father's mistreatment, but for the systemic issues that allowed such behavior to persist. The video continued to circulate online, gaining millions of views. People from all walks of life shared their outrage and support for Samuel. Veterans organizations, civil rights groups, and even celebrities began to voice their concern. Hashtags like #JusticeForGeneralCarter and #RespectOurVeterans started trending, and the case became a symbol of a broader fight for dignity and equality. Local protests sprang up around the police department. Community members held signs reading, "Honor our heroes," and "End police misconduct." The protests were peaceful but passionate, with speakers sharing their stories and calling for change. Marcus attended one such protest, standing side by side with neighbors who had known his father for years. "General Carter has always been a pillar of this community," said one elderly neighbor. "He didn't deserve this, and we won't stand for it." At the same time, Marcus worked tirelessly behind the scenes. He contacted witnesses who had been at the park that day, including the young woman who had recorded the video. Her testimony was powerful. "I couldn't believe what I was seeing," she told Marcus. "He was sitting there, minding his own business, and that officer just came at him. It wasn't right." Rebecca Simmons, a fellow attorney and longtime friend of Marcus, joined the case to provide support. Together, they examined Officer Daniels' record and uncovered a troubling pattern. Over the years, Daniels had received multiple complaints for excessive force, but none had led to significant consequences. "This isn't just about your father," Rebecca said. "This is about a broken system." Meanwhile, Samuel watched the growing movement with a mixture of pride and humility. He hadn't sought this attention, but he understood its importance. "If my story can help others, then it's worth it," he told Marcus one evening. The pressure on the police department grew. Under public scrutiny, the department announced that Officer Daniels had been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. This was a small victory, but Marcus knew it wasn't enough. "This is just the beginning," he said to Rebecca. "We need real accountability." The protests grew larger with each passing day. Veterans from across the state joined in, many of them in uniform, standing as a show of solidarity. Samuel attended one of the rallies, seated in his wheelchair, but with his head held high. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of experience and authority. "I served this country because I believed in its ideals," he said. "I believed in justice, equality, and respect for all people. What happened to me is not just my fight. It's our fight. Together, we can make sure this doesn't happen again." The crowd erupted in applause, chanting his name. Samuel's words inspired not just those in attendance, but people watching from home. The rally was covered extensively by the media, bringing even more attention to the case. Behind closed doors, the police department began to feel the heat. The chief of police held a press conference, promising a thorough investigation and pledging to review the department's policies on use of force and officer accountability. While some saw this as a step forward, others, including Marcus, remained skeptical. "Words are easy," he said. "We need action." As the weeks went on, the movement continued to grow. Samuel's story had struck a chord, and people were demanding change. Marcus knew there was still a long road ahead, but he also knew they were making progress. Every step, every voice, and every action brought them closer to justice, not just for Samuel, but for everyone who had been wronged by the system. The day of the first court hearing arrived, and the courthouse was surrounded by a large crowd of supporters holding signs. People chanted slogans like "Justice for General Carter" and "Respect our heroes." The air was thick with tension and anticipation, as everyone hoped for a step toward accountability. Inside the courthouse, Marcus Carter and Rebecca Simmons sat at the plaintiff's table, their legal arguments carefully prepared. Across the aisle sat the defense team representing Officer Daniels, who appeared nervous. This wasn't just another case for the court. It was a battle for justice that had captured the nation's attention. The proceedings began with opening statements. Rebecca, standing tall and confident, addressed the judge and jury. "This case is not just about one man's actions. It's about a system that allows abuse of power to go unchecked. General Samuel Carter dedicated his life to protecting the freedoms we all enjoy. On that day, he was not treated with the respect he deserved. Instead, he was treated as if his life and dignity didn't matter. We're here to ensure that accountability is served." The defense tried to paint a different picture. They claimed that Officer Daniels had acted under pressure and that his actions were not intentional but rather a misjudgment in a high-stress situation. Marcus clenched his fists under the table, but Rebecca placed a calming hand on his arm. She knew the evidence would speak louder than the defense's arguments. The prosecution began presenting their case, starting with the video footage. The courtroom was silent as the video played, showing Daniels aggressively confronting Samuel. Gasps could be heard as the moment of the Baton strike played on the screen. The jury watched intently, their expressions shifting from disbelief to outrage. Next, witnesses were called to the stand. The young woman who had recorded the video recounted what she had seen that day. General Carter was just sitting there, minding his own business, she said. He didn't do anything wrong. The officer didn't even try to talk to him calmly. He just assumed the worst. Other bystanders testified as well, painting a clear picture of the unnecessary aggression used by Daniels. Each testimony reinforced the fact that Samuel had posed no threat and had been treated unfairly. When Samuel himself took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. He spoke with a calm but firm voice, recounting his experience. I faced many challenges in my life, but I never thought I would face something like this in my own country. I've always believed in the values of justice and fairness, and I hope this case helps us move closer to those ideals. The defense called Officer Daniels to the stand, hoping to garner sympathy by portraying him as an officer under stress. Daniels admitted to making a mistake, but avoided taking full responsibility. Rebecca's cross-examination, however, was sharp and relentless. She questioned his pattern of behavior, bringing up past complaints and showing that this was not an isolated incident. Officer Daniels, Rebecca said, her voice steady, would you have acted the same way if General Carter were not a black man sitting in a wheelchair? Did you take even a moment to assess the situation before using force? Daniels hesitated, his confidence faltering. I thought he might have been involved with the vandalism. So you assumed, Rebecca pressed, and that assumption led to violence against an innocent man. The courtroom was silent as Daniels struggled to respond. The jury's expressions showed that Rebecca's words had made an impact. As the day's proceedings ended, Marcus felt a mixture of exhaustion and determination. They had presented a strong case, but he knew the fight wasn't over. Outside, the crowd cheered as Marcus and Samuel exited the courthouse. Reporters swarmed them, asking for statements. We are here for justice, Marcus said firmly. Not just for my father, but for everyone who has faced injustice. This case is about accountability and change. Samuel, though tired, smiled faintly. His son's strength and determination gave him hope. The battle was far from over, but they were one step closer to achieving the justice they deserved. The courtroom was packed as the trial entered its final stages. The prosecution had presented a solid case, and the defense had struggled to counter the mounting evidence against Officer Daniels. As the jury deliberated, the entire nation waited anxiously for the outcome. Outside the courthouse, protesters and supporters gathered, chanting and holding signs that read "Justice for General Carter" and "Accountability now." Inside, Marcus Carter sat beside his father, Samuel. The older man's calm demeanor remained steady, though Marcus could see the exhaustion in his father's eyes. "Are you holding up okay, Dad?" Marcus asked quietly. Samuel gave a small nod. "I've faced tougher battles, son. No matter what happens, I'm proud of how far we've come." The courtroom doors opened, and the judge returned to take his seat. The jury had reached a decision. The tension in the room was palpable as the judge asked the foreperson to deliver the verdict. The jury foreperson, a middle-aged woman with a determined expression, stood and unfolded the paper in her hands. "In the matter of excessive force and misconduct, we, the jury, find the defendant, Officer Daniels, guilty." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom, followed by quiet murmurs of relief. Outside, the news spread like wildfire, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Samuel remained composed, but Marcus saw a glimmer of emotion in his father's eyes. Justice had been served, but the victory was bittersweet. The judge addressed the court. "Officer Daniels, your actions on the day in question were reckless and unbecoming of someone sworn to protect and serve. This court sentences you to 3 years in prison and mandatory de-escalation training. Furthermore, this case will serve as a reminder that no one is above the law." Daniels looked down, his face pale, As he was escorted out of the courtroom, Marcus felt a mix of emotions: relief, anger, and determination. This wasn't just about punishing one officer, it was about ensuring systemic change. After the verdict, Samuel and Marcus stepped outside to face the media and the gathered crowd. Reporters shouted questions, and Marcus raised his hand to signal for silence. "Today, justice was served," he said firmly. "But this is just one step. We must continue to fight for accountability and reform to ensure that no one else has to endure what my father experienced." Samuel leaned toward the microphone, his voice steady but emotional. "I served this country because I believed in its ideals. What happened to me should never happen to anyone, but I am grateful to see justice prevail. Let this be a turning point for change." The crowd erupted into applause, and chants of "Justice for General Carter" filled the air once again. Samuel's story had become a symbol of resilience and the need for accountability. In the days following the trial, the city announced a series of reforms aimed at improving police practices. These included mandatory de-escalation training, independent oversight for complaints, and community engagement programs. While these changes were a step in the right direction, Marcus knew there was still much work to be done. Samuel received countless messages of support from people all over the country. Veterans reached out, thanking him for his service and for standing up against injustice. Community members visited his home, bringing flowers and sharing their own stories of resilience and hope. One afternoon, as Samuel sat on his porch, Marcus joined him with a cup of coffee. "You know, Dad," Marcus said, "your strength inspired all of this. You turned something terrible into something meaningful." Samuel smiled faintly. "We did it together, son. This isn't just my story. It's ours." Marcus nodded, feeling a sense of pride and purpose. While the battle for justice wasn't over, they had made an undeniable impact. Samuel's dignity and Marcus's determination had sparked a movement that would continue to push for equality and accountability. As the sun set over the neighborhood, Samuel looked out at the peaceful street and felt a sense of hope. His story had been heard, and it would continue to inspire others to stand up for what was right. Together, he and Marcus had shown that even in the face of injustice, change was possible. In the weeks following the trial, life began to settle for General Samuel Carter and his son Marcus. The court's decision had brought a sense of justice, but it also sparked a larger conversation across the nation. People who had seen the video or followed the trial now felt emboldened to share their own stories of injustice, creating a wave of awareness and a demand for systemic reform. The police department announced immediate changes to its policies. Officers would undergo mandatory de-escalation and bias training, and an independent review board was established to oversee complaints against law enforcement. These reforms, though overdue, were a direct result of the pressure Samuel's case had brought. For Samuel, the changes brought a sense of closure. Sitting on his porch one morning, he looked out at the neighborhood he had called home for decades. Neighbors often stopped by to check on him, bringing baked goods or simply sharing their appreciation for his courage. Despite the physical and emotional toll of the incident, Samuel remained steadfast. He knew his story had made a difference. One day, Marcus approached his father with an idea. "Dad, what do you think about starting a foundation in your name? Something that helps veterans and others who've faced injustice." Samuel looked thoughtful. "A foundation, huh? What would we call it?" Marcus smiled. "The Carter Foundation for Justice and Equality." Samuel nodded slowly. "I like that. If we can help even one person avoid what I went through, it'll be worth it." Within months, the foundation was up and running. Its mission was clear: to provide legal support for veterans and individuals affected by police misconduct, to advocate for policy reforms, and to educate communities on their rights. Marcus took the lead in running the foundation, using his legal expertise and network to build a team of dedicated advocates. The foundation's first major event was a community rally held at the local park, the same park where the incident with Samuel had taken place. Hundreds of people attended, including veterans, activists, and families, who had experienced similar injustices. Samuel, sitting in his wheelchair at the front of the stage, addressed the crowd with his usual calm and commanding presence. "We're here today not just because of what happened to me," he began. "We're here because we believe in justice, fairness, and the idea that everyone deserves to be treated with respect. Change doesn't happen overnight, but together, we can make it happen." The crowd erupted in applause, and chants of "Carter Strong" filled the air. Marcus stood beside his father, feeling an overwhelming sense of pride. The work they were doing wasn't just about their family, it was about creating a better future for everyone. As the rally continued, people approached Samuel to share their gratitude and admiration. One young man, a high school student, told him, "You inspire me, General. Because of you, I want to study law and help people." Samuel smiled warmly. "Thank you, son. Never stop fighting for what's right." Meanwhile, Marcus worked tirelessly to expand the foundation's reach. They partnered with other organizations, hosted workshops, and provided resources for those in need. Samuel's story remained at the heart of their work, a reminder of the resilience and strength it took to stand up against injustice. In the years that followed, the Carter Foundation grew into a nationally recognized organization. Samuel became a beloved figure, not just in his community but across the country. His story was taught in schools, and his legacy inspired countless people to demand accountability and equality. One evening, as Samuel and Marcus sat together on the porch, the sun setting in the distance, Samuel spoke quietly. "You know, son, I never expected any of this. I just wanted to live my life with dignity." Marcus nodded. "And you did, Dad. You turned a moment of pain into a movement of change." Samuel smiled, his eyes reflecting both the hardships he had endured and the hope he now felt. "We did it together." As the stars began to appear, Samuel felt a deep sense of peace. His story, his struggle, and his courage had sparked a legacy that would endure for generations. The fight for justice was far from over, but Samuel knew that he and Marcus had made a difference, and that was more than enough.